that those are areas where we are able to play a role. Some of the other feedback that we've heard, that there should be funding opportunities to help with policy implementation. So funding things like secret documents, overlay zones, finding a way to assist with some shovel-ready projects. There's been talk about density inclusionary programs and SANDAG working to provide more local regionalized tools, sharing information, that kind of approach. And that we should also provide more education and outreach in regard to specific issues that the region faces. So things like ADU policies, best practices. And then we can also, I think there's been a good response to how we can play a role in finding other funding sources for affordable housing. It seems like one of the most challenging things to get affordable housing built is to find funding for it. And so I think we can certainly find a way to play a role to bring more state and federal dollars into this region to help assist in that effort. So there's still opportunities for cities to participate in giving us this feedback. I'm hopeful that we can wrap it up by the end of the month. And then use the month of December to start forming the shape of our housing program, because we do need to apply for the additional funds from HCD in early 2021. So we need to show them that we've made progress and we have some ideas that we can put together a budget of how we're going to spend the rest of our REAP funds. So feel free to reach out to me and we'll try to get a meeting and an interview scheduled with each of your jurisdictions. And thank you to the jurisdictions who have already participated. We definitely appreciate the feedback that we've heard so far. And then I'm going to hand it off to Jenny Russo, who is with our grants team. And there's some coordination that'll be going on at SANDAG in the next couple of months as we set up a new housing incentive program and also look at some of our existing grant programs. And so Jenny's going to talk about the Smart Growth Incentive Program and the Active Transportation Program and where we are with those.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Jenny Russo. I work in we're now called the Contracts and Grants Department of SANDAG. So as the agency is looking at doing some of its reorganization efforts, one of the things that we've done is we've brought our grants, different various portions of grants that we work on into our contracting group, or we're trying to bring everything in-house as much as we can. So you're seeing a different face, maybe some of you I haven't worked with in the past. So one of the reasons we're doing this is we're finding there's a lot of synergies in different grant programs that our group is really familiar with, having worked on competitive procurements and things like that. So the first thing that we have looked at is the active transportation and smart growth incentive programs. Typically, the call for projects for those would have been held sometime around this fall. And as you all know, we're doing an update to our regional plan. So we've been working closely with Seth and Colleen in the planning department to figure out how do we align the efforts of the grant programs with the efforts that's happening on the update of the regional plan. So as was mentioned in this agenda item, is there's a delay to the call for projects. So it won't be coming out until probably sometime in 2022. That's so we can finish working on the updates to regional plan. And then as we traditionally do is come back through the various working groups and meet with all of you and say, okay, now that we have our regional plan, how do we want this grant funding to be working? So we anticipate probably doing similar activities as we have in the past of getting ready to do a call for projects. So it's just delaying the timing a little bit of that. And part of that effort is looking across the different grant programs and finding other places maybe where things can be reorganized a little bit. So Seth talked about the housing incentive program. It has a lot of tie-ins to the smart growth incentive program. So maybe splitting active and smart growth apart, but aligning smart growth with housing, or who knows what we're doing. We're kind of looking at all these different sorts of efforts. That's one idea, possibly. It's really early, we're not sure, but wanted to get an update for all of you so you know that there is a pause that's happening with the program as we work on other efforts. We see how the new housing program can be aligned with this and different things like that. So I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any, but nice to meet all of you.
Okay, well, I see that Russ Cunningham from Oceanside has joined us. Before we can have any discussions or answer any questions, I just want to confirm with Seth that everyone has stayed present and that we actually do have a quorum.
I can confirm we do have a quorum.
Awesome. Okay. Well, given that, thank you, Jenny, for the update. And I just want to ask again that our twig members who are with us, if they have any questions or any comments for Jenny. And I am, let's see here, not seeing any hands raised. So with that, thank you both for the update there on what's going on in the world of grants and activities on SANDAG's side, as far as trying to get some additional feedback from jurisdictions on how to best leverage some of the needs that we'll have moving forward on some of these important projects. Okay, so if I can jump back ahead again, just want to say welcome to everybody. We are going to go ahead and start back in the order of the meeting. So that puts us to agenda item number 1, which is seeking a motion to approve the July 9th, 2020 meeting minutes. And in this case, I do need to have a hand raised. I think I'm sorry, not a hand raised. Seth, just remind me, do you want me to just go ahead and call individual names and have them weigh in yay or nay? Is that preferred by SANDAG?
Yes, we just need a motion to approve the minutes and a second.
Right. So if I could get that motion going, that would be great.
Twig members, you can turn on your cameras or your microphones if you want to make a motion.
City of Imperial Beach, Megan Openshaw makes a motion to approve the minutes.
And do I have a second?
Second, Scott Donaghy, City of Chula Vista.
All right, with that motion, let me go ahead and go down the list here. Chris Jacobs.
Thank you. I actually did not attend the July meeting, but Michael Coyne at Santee did. Michael, if you could represent Santee.
I'll abstain. I wasn't at the meeting either. Santee will abstain.
Okay, and typically SANDAG staff weighs in at this point and indicates that it is okay to vote on the minutes even if you were not in attendance, but if you're more comfortable doing an abstention, then that's perfectly acceptable as well. So we do have an abstention from Santee. Next up here would be Dave Devries from Poway. And it looks like you are muted.
I'll unmute you, Dave, if we need it. Let's see if that works. Doesn't look like it's letting me unmute him.
Okay, let me go ahead and go down to, we'll come back to Dave. Let's go down to Jesse Brown, City Coronado.
Aye.
And Joseph Smith, Del Mar.
Aye.
Bear with me as I'm going down my list here. Noah Alvey.
No, I've unmuted your cell phone.
Unmuted. Aye.
Russ Cunningham, Oceanside.
Hi, Karen. Aye on behalf of Jeff Hunt.
Okay, and Karen Brindley, aye on behalf of San Marcos. And let's see, were we able to come back to Dave from Poway?
Not yet. We also have Sandy Hazelwood from the County of San Diego.
Yes, Sandy, please.
Andy, do you have a vote?
Hmm. Okay. How many votes do we, how many, do we have enough to have the motion pass, Seth?
I think we do. I have Dave Devries in the chat that's written that he votes aye. So we
Okay.
do have a majority of the board members present to accept the minutes.
Okay, let's go ahead and accept that the motion is approved and the meeting minutes from July 9th have been approved at this point. Okay, moving on, agenda item number 2, we've got public comments and communications as well as member comments. This is the opportunity for the public to provide any comments. Do we have any from the public, Seth?
If anyone from the public has a comment, they can raise their hands. I don't see any hands raised.
Very good. And Seth, I think, did you have something that you wanted to discuss?
I did. Very quickly, I just wanted to introduce the new land use program and land use and planning program manager, Tuere Fa'aola. She took over a couple of months ago, and I think this is the first non-our regional plan twig meeting that we've had. So I just wanted to give her a quick opportunity to introduce herself.
Hi, thanks, Seth. So again, my name is Tuere Fa'aola, and I'm really happy to be here with you guys today for this twig meeting and looking forward to working with you. Some of you I've worked with in the past, but I'm looking forward to a chance to work with you again in this new capacity that I have here at SANDAG. So thanks, Seth, for the chance to just say hello.
All right. Well, welcome. Look forward to working with you in the future. Okay. Do I have any other let's see, member comments at this point? I'm not seeing any hands raised. And with that, we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item number 3. We've got Eric DeCock from the Office of Planning and Research here to provide us an overview basically of the Wildfire Hazard Planning Technical Advisory, I guess, memorandum or document. So with that, I'll kick it over to Eric.
Great, thanks Chair, and thanks SANDAG staff for having me today. Eric DeCock with OPR, and I'm going to be just doing a quick run through of some work we've been doing for the past year or so on updating our fire hazard planning technical advisory. Let me quickly share my screen so we can get the slideshow running. Hopefully everyone can see the slideshow. If not, someone please holler.
We can see it, thanks.
Great. Okay, so moving ahead. So I think we're all aware, living here in California and the year that we've been through, 2020 is an unprecedented year, and I think a clarion call for change. And I think the legislature recognized this even years ago as we saw our most catastrophic fires in the 2017-2018 time period. This year, it's about the size and just the extent of burn. We had our first gigafire in California, the August complex, burning in the Mendocino National Forest, burned most of the national forest and burned over 1 million acres, our first gigafire. We've also seen megafires, 4 of the largest megafires to date have all occurred in this calendar year. And I think many are calling for change. We actually began this process to update this technical advisory well before this calendar year, but I think the trends and the data are clear. And so we're going to talk about some of the trends that led to the problem that we're in today. We'll talk about our update to the technical advisory and just some advice and some guidance, updated guidance to local planning agencies, regional entities, and all sorts of stakeholders who really need to come around this issue and kind of up our game on planning and implementation to protect the state's integrity moving forward. Obviously, climate change has played a huge role in this. The science is clear that climate is affecting California's fire landscape in a very adverse way. We're seeing very large increases in temperature. Soil moisture is drying out more quickly and in a longer duration as is vegetation. The fire season alone is 2 to 3 more months longer on average on either end of the hottest part of our year than it has been in a historical period. So this phenomenon of climate change combined with over a century of troublesome management of our wildlands has really led to an exacerbated set of conditions. So we can blame some of the problem on climate change, but the reality is it's not just the climate that's the problem. It's actually California's ability to deal with our wildlands and the vegetation in our landscape that's leading to very large wildfires. The third really big dimension of our wildfire problem has to do with growth and development in what we call the wildland-urban interface, or the WUI. And I think this graph I have on this screen sort of indicates and shows over the past several decades how growth and expansion in the WUI, combined with the forces of climate change and the sort of the bigger problem of forest and landscape management of California, has led to increasing areas being burned in our interface conditions, which has led to increasing losses in our communities. Half of California's housing has been built in the WUI since about the last 25 to 30 years. So that effort or that effect combined with this growing severity of wildfire conditions has led to a lot more risk. We're seeing increasingly severe wildfire events, but we're also seeing growing number of properties at risk. We used to see maybe several hundred to 1,000 homes a year lost in California. We're now seeing an average of 5,000 or more homes lost to the tune of billions of dollars in insured losses. And then of course, our public costs for responding to wildfire, for cleaning up after wildfire disasters is actually higher than our insured losses in California. So this is a huge wake-up call. It's not just a health and safety issue, it's a financial issue. So we need to do a better job. And I think this is part of what this technical advisory update is also about. So we do have a legislative mandate to do this update. It's a codified in SB 901 and AB 2911, which actually required OPR to do this update with a very specific purpose in mind, which is to look at specific land use strategies to reduce fire risk to building infrastructure and communities. And it requires us to keep this document updated on a regular basis, at least once every 8 years. We do have a very big patchwork of policy documents, regulation, planning requirements in California. I won't try to read the slide, it's just as illustrative. We did use this in the document, in our updated document, just to kind of show what's out there, what's guiding wildfire mitigation and risk reduction at the planning level, whether it's those local hazard mitigation plans. We have shared stewardship agreements between the state and federal government, how to better manage our wildlands. But then of course, land use planning development, there's a lot of work already in, there's a lot of codified requirements already in place, as well as planning requirements. So this sort of patchwork of policy and regulations, we try to do a good job in this update to really organize those and make sure that each of these different set of policies, requirements, guidance plays a different role. And so I don't have time to go into every single piece of this today, but just want to let you know this is a key aspect and a feature of the new document. It's just to provide some education and framing for planners and stakeholders who are going to be doing work around planning for wildfire. The safety element, now let me just back up a little bit. So the general plan in California, the technical advisory that we have and we have updated is focused on local city and county general plans. And so I'm going to quickly just go over what is required in the general plan, at least from a legal perspective, for addressing wildfire hazards, and then sort of jump off from that point on how and what we did to update the technical advisory to address some of these emerging issues. Now, wildfire is, along with many other hazards, a requirement in general plan safety element, and some of the key language that's in the law that guides what local governments must do is to identify not just the hazard and the problem of the hazard, but the unreasonable risks that are placed, the people, infrastructure, buildings, other aspects of the community. It's about reducing risks to those aspects of our communities. So that's a really important framing consideration as we move forward in this presentation, and actually something that becomes very important as well in the technical advisory. There are other requirements in the safety element that are very important. Some of these requirements were not in place when the last version of the technical advisory was prepared and adopted, or not adopted, issued. The climate adaptation requirements in the safety element are also relatively new. And so we took a lot of care this time around to make sure that when we're talking about specific guidance to wildfire, that we're also thinking about how to align a wildfire analysis in a general plan, in a safety element, with the work that needs to be done to look at climate vulnerability and adaptation. So that's a new dimension that wasn't really there before. Local hazard mitigation plans, of course, are not new. Those have been in effect since 2000, and they're a federal tool for financing, but there's a huge opportunity to align general plans with those local hazard mitigation plan. A key aspect of that is the AB 2140 financial incentive, which allows post-disaster mitigation costs to be covered, the local match to be covered by the state if you have updated and implemented your local hazard mitigation plan into your safety element. So we'll talk about that again a bit later. Another really important planning tool that we talk about in the new guidance is the community wildfire protection plans and how they can serve as a valuable resource for interagency collaboration, stakeholder engagement, especially looking at reducing the severity of hazards out in the wildlands and parts of the wild and urban interface. These new requirements for the safety element, there are very specific requirements for those cities and counties that have lands in what we call the state responsibility area. Now that's the area where the state has responsibility for suppression, the financial and physical responsibility. SB Set 1241 also says that cities, especially cities or counties who have lands in the local responsibility areas that are in very high fire hazard severity zones also must meet some very specific requirements. So approximately 189 cities and 52 counties in the state are subject to these very specific wildfire hazard mitigation and risk reduction requirements. And the triggering mechanisms for those that haven't done this work yet in the general plan is the next housing element update on or after January 1 of 2014. So just, the regulatory context setting aside, I think as we looked at the existing technical advisory that was issued in 2015, what it did and what it didn't do, there were some key questions and sort of framing pieces that we'll talk about here. It became very clear to us as we pulled our interagency collaborative working group together that a key piece needs to be engagement. A lot of cities and counties, a lot of planners, special districts were really not fully engaging with the community, the affected stakeholders who have roles in the process of not just addressing the severity of hazards, but the reducing risks to homes, buildings, infrastructure, and vulnerable communities. And so that engagement piece is a very strong focus. Another key consideration is the level at which cities and counties are analyzing fire hazards and risks and whether or not those risks are really well understood and fully affecting the outcomes in planning. The third consideration is once you know the wildfire hazards and risks, what are you going to do about it? Is it enough to just map your hazards and risks and say you'll send some firefighters out, or have you really fully grappled with the reality of what it takes to fully protect a community, not just existing development on the ground, but new development that could exist or expand the WUI moving forward. So there's sort of a bigger, broader purpose that we believe wasn't really fully captured in the TA before, that we're now providing more specific guidance on, sort of questions about growth and where is the right and the best way to grow in the most safest way possible. There's also different trade-offs about different planning approaches that the TA addresses, and also a bunch of new resources. Now, in terms of engagement, talking with CAL FIRE and some fire behavior experts and others that have done a lot of work around kind of integrative wildfire planning, that you need to engage your fire agencies, your offices of emergency services early, often as you begin the hazard and risk assessment and policy development process. Also not often well understood is how to really do meaningful engagement of community members themselves, especially those that are the most vulnerable segments of the population, those living in the highest risk areas of a community. We have some really great public engagement tools or organizational frameworks that are being used very well in California, whether it's the fire safe councils, the FireWise communities. But what we're finding is that it's not just the true believers and those who have time on their hands that need to be engaged. It's the entirety of the community that's at risk that really needs to be made aware, but also be part of that decision-making process. Tribal engagement, working with tribal nations and indigenous peoples is a really important opportunity that we're finding a lot of communities are waking up to this reality. Our tribal communities and their ancestors played key roles in helping to manage our landscapes and using prescribed fires and other tools to really maintain healthy forests and healthy landscapes. And so that's another really important starting point, is working and engaging in tribal communities who can bring ancient and sort of traditional ecological knowledge into the planning process. So as you can just see here, and this graphic on the screen really comes right out of the general plan guidelines, and it speaks to just the different levels of engagement and how to really work a little bit from informing and consulting, but working down into really involving and collaborating with stakeholders. The second really big piece that I mentioned earlier was looking not just at hazards, but risk. And this diagram on the screen really shows a more holistic hazard and risk assessment framework that we believe is very important and very valuable and has been used effectively by several communities in terms of not just characterizing wildfire hazards in terms of the intensity of those fires or the likelihood of whether they happen, but really going beyond that and looking at what's at risk. And there's different technical terms like susceptibility, first and second order considerations in that susceptibility analysis. But the guidance goes into a fair amount of detail on data sources, methods, tools that can be used to really produce a more holistic and effective fire hazard and risk assessment to determine what kind of fire problem might you have, but really more importantly, who and what's at risk and how to manage those risks moving forward in different contexts. So really quickly, because I know I'm going to be running out of time shortly, but I'm condensing about 20 to 30 pages of material into one slide here. Try to go quickly. When looking at actionable planning and policy solutions, like actual guidance to what do you do once you've sort of done your technical studies, right, in terms of that hazard and risk assessment, there's about 5 or 6 really kind of key groupings of recommendations for what local agencies should be doing here. One of the key findings about the general plan is that many cities and counties statewide have focused mostly just on the safety element. And that's understandable because that's what the statutory requirements, that's where they live, and that's what the focus is on. But what we're finding is that many general plans do not seem to be, their land use elements don't seem to be connected to their safety elements in a meaningful way. In other words, we're doing our safety element updates, we're identifying hazards and risks, but the policies and programmatic actions do not seem to be connected to the land use development review process. In other words, the work we're doing to assess hazards and risk isn't affecting land use decision-making in a meaningful way. So I won't get into a lot of specifics here, but we do provide a lot of different flavor of guidance around ways that that can be done, whether it's using overlay zoning, putting more specific policies or programs into the land use element, using your site suitability analyses for housing element updates, and using hazards and risk along with other factors about environmental constraints to really help make sure that growth and development is going into the right places. And we're looking at also multi-dimensional aspects of land use, right? Land use, we can just look at one issue, whether it's location efficiency, hazards, looking at conservation and open space needs, development pressures. But are we doing this in a holistic and meaningful way, right? And so that's really what that first bullet is all about. And so there's quite a few new pages of guidance that give the flavor of sort of the tools, the mechanisms from a land use planning perspective that can be effective, as well as how to integrate considerations across the different elements of the general plan. Another big finding was that a lot of the work that's gone into hazard and risk assessment and mitigation and different types of plans has focused more on trying to control the hazard. But we haven't done the greatest job at looking at who's and what's at risk and how to reduce those risks, especially in existing development. Now, some might say, oh, well, general plans aren't really so much concerned about what's on the ground today. They're really more looking at growth, land use development, growth, change. Well, we would argue that part of the change part of the general plan and managing change means looking at the existing communities and how it needs to grow and change, and maybe to reduce risks of development that predated many of our existing regulations, codes, and standards, which are proven to be somewhat effective than having none. So looking at existing communities, existing development, existing infrastructure, how do you protect and retrofit that built environment that already exists today to make it more resilient, right? So we look at things like home hardening, infrastructure hardening, more vegetation clearance around sensitive infrastructure corridors, and other methods that we believe can be identified in the general plan and part of a mitigation strategy, and or aligned with the general plan through a local hazard mitigation plan or a community wildfire protection plan. So that's a big focus of that second piece. Another big framework here is just knowing that the general plan update process itself has value. It's not just what's written into the policy document and implementing codes and standards after the planning process is done. It's the actual action of updating the plan itself and making sure that we're looking at growth alternatives and land use in a meaningful way before the ink is dry on the draft policy document. Now, The general plan, all that said, the land use element itself does have value, and some of those implementing mechanisms are the right things to do. If decisions have been made about continuing to expand the footprint of the WUI, building more development in the WUI itself near the wildlands, there's a lot of protective tools, as I mentioned earlier. So knowing that the process itself of updating a general plan is value, but it's the implementing codes and standards and lower level plans that will help to make more protective measures a reality. The fourth big piece I think we want to highlight too is that planners in the general plan and some of the related plans, we can be seeing local governments playing a more active role in reducing the severity of wildfire events when they occur. And so becoming partners in more widespread use of things like prescribed burning, vegetation treatments, helping to streamline permitting actions or CEQA review around that. There's been some great models that have been put into place by some leading jurisdictions that really highlight ways that local governments, as well as working with land management agencies and others, can be partners in more intensive and more sophisticated fuel modification strategies. And of course, harmonizing all that work with the conservation and open space policy, which can be a great way the general plan comes back into play there in terms of looking at beneficial integrated land use and conservation strategies. Another big bucket of guidance in the new TA is really focusing a lot more on disaster preparedness, evacuation, and recovery. We've seen precedents in California and some communities learning the hard lessons that maybe if they had prepared for how to recover, there would have been an easier time, right? And so looking at better ways to be more prepared, looking at the needs of vulnerable communities, disadvantaged communities here. So our frontline communities in many parts of California are going to suffer the most from wildfire and other climate-driven impacts. So it's about making sure those communities are prepared, that there's sort of a resilience building, capacity building set of programs and infrastructure in place for the human side of disaster preparedness and recovery. There are new general plan requirements in effect as well for evacuation routes, ingress, egress, that the guidance speaks to briefly. Last but not least, the planning for compounding cascading hazard events, right? So wildfire isn't just the only problem when they happen. We've got wildfires and debris that needs to be removed. Wild mudslides themselves are a big issue. Water supply contamination, the broad phenomena that many experienced this year in the most intense way in decades around wildfire smoke exposure. All of these issues speak to just kind of that need to really think long-term about not just the fire itself, but what could happen afterwards. So with all that said, I'm going to cut my presentation short. There's a lot of examples and resources, case studies, financing, funding tools, some great ideas in the TA document we hope folks will look at. And with that, I'll wrap up and answer questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. Given that this is a discussion item, I would like to ask if there are any members of the public that have any questions, and then also we'll have an opportunity for TWIG members to ask questions or provide comments. Seth, can you help me out with that?
I am not seeing any hands raised from the public.
Perfect. All right, TWIG members, this is your opportunity. If you would like to ask a question, comment, please raise your hand. I have Russ Cunningham from City of Oceanside.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for that presentation. Can you talk a little bit about how cities are defining unreasonable risk of hazard?
That's a great question. We don't see that specific term get raised super often in the plans themselves, right? That's sort of a statutory requirement. It's sort of like a guiding framing, but I think that's like almost $1 million question, right? And that we really struggled with as we were putting this updated TA together about what are the sideboards around a risk analysis and when do you start to see those tipping points? Looking at the severity of hazards that may exist, who's already at risk or exposed, or how would you expose new people to risk if you put development in certain places? And I think that's sort of the $1 million question, right? There are tools out there. I didn't get to get into the weeds too much in the presentation, is trying to cover the framework of the TA. But there are mapping products available, a growing number of them, that help communities understand the levels of threat or kind of risk levels and risk tolerances. And the insurance industry has done a great job at this, about making some of that data available. There are fire modeling tools that really help can help understand the severity. If the severity event occurs in certain contexts, like a dead-end canyon, certain environments, are there scenarios where first responders may refuse to go or be unwilling to go unless there's certain safeguards put in place, right? So we're starting to see some, not just technology, but sort of decision-making frameworks that can really guide lead agencies in understanding where are some of those places where you start to reach unreasonable levels of risk. But I can't say that the TA guides and provides an exact pathway for answering that question, but as you look at some of the work, especially in doing the hazard and risk assessment, some of the new guidance begins to kind of point in that direction.
Okay, and let's see here if I have any other questions or comments. I've got Dave Devries from City of Poway.
Dave, I've unmuted your phone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate the presentation. A couple questions here. Are these slides going to be shared with all the TWIG members?
Yeah, Eric, if you can email me the presentation, we'll send it out as the agenda item information.
Will do.
And I just wanted to let everyone know that Eric's been great with working with the City of Poway throughout this process. We're trying to update our housing element at the same time as our public safety element, and we've shared with Eric our community outreach program and some other questions, and he's been very responsive and helpful throughout that process. So I think Eric would agree that he's open to that type of contact. And then also, Eric, I just wanted to verify with you that, get kind of final clarification that there's not any formal certification or approval process from OPR, only CAL FIRE is the only agency we need to worry about reviewing the public safety element update.
Yeah, that's correct. So there are minimum kind of notification review requirements with CAL FIRE on the safety element as with some of the other agencies. OPR is not one of those.
Perfect. And that's all I had. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Great questions, Dave, and appreciate the feedback regarding staff assistance to the City of Poway. I think it's great to hear that. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Let me do one.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Thanks. Eric, knowing that fire hazard, wildfire risk is still going to be an issue in the upcoming years at the legislature, and seeing that there was a bill that was passed last year, or that was approved by the legislature and vetoed by the governor, SB 182, that would have affected housing elements and the RENA process. Are you hearing any other information or any other ideas that are being thrown about other ways that wildfire risk might need to be addressed in general plans?
Yeah, I think that I have gotten a number of calls asking why the bill was vetoed, and I can't necessarily answer that. I'm not the governor, but I think there are elements in 182 that were good, and there's a lot of consensus. There was some really good stuff in 182. Just some of the foundational land use planning. If you read the TA in detail, you'll see that there's elements of 182 that we framed as guidance, not mandates, but sort of guidance about what's the best practice around using the land use planning process, zoning, and other implementing mechanisms to really effectively reduce risk, especially not just through the macro level, but in looking at project level review requirements and so forth. I can't say, I don't have the crystal ball, know exactly what's going to get floated and what legislators are interested in picking things back up. I know that Jackson is terming out, for example, so we don't really have a crystal ball right now of knowing what's going to come forward in the next session, but I think I would not be surprised to see another attempt at maybe bringing some of this back. Can't say exactly what the elements would be, and we're just looking forward to seeing what gets floated in the next session and how we can be helpful as an advisor in that regard.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for contributing to this agenda item. And Eric, thank you for the excellent presentation and the availability of resources that have been provided by the state. Okay, so moving on to agenda item number 4, we've got Brendan Reed here from the San Diego Regional Airport Authority to talk to us about airport land use compatibility planning. So Eric, you're up, or I'm sorry, Brendan, you're up.
Great, can you see my slide?
We can.
Oh, great. Well, first, thank you to the working group chair and Sandag staff for allowing myself and my colleague, Ralph Fredman, to come here today. Just give a bit of an overview about airport land use compatibility planning. One of the roles when the airport authority was created by state legislation in 2003 was to act as the airport land use commission for the region. So we wanted to provide kind of just an overview of those efforts. But most likely you already have frontline staff in your individual jurisdictions, planning departments that we work with on this item. So this whole idea of airport land use compatibility planning is really guided by the State Aeronautics Act, which set out to balance airports and the expansion of airports with protecting the public around those airports. And they did so by focusing on land use measures that would reduce that conflict, especially around noise and safety hazards. That's codified in the Public Utilities Code, but we also use the Caltrans Airport Land Use Planning Handbook for guidance on this topic. And you notice that part of the paragraph that I have presented, the last part of the bold area, talks about it's to the extent that these areas are not already devoted to incompatible uses. And when you dive into the State Aeronautics Act and the handbook, it's basically saying, this is really looking at new development or changes in uses. If something already exists, the ALUCP, Airport Land Use Compatibility Planning, doesn't really impact it. But if someone tries to expand that incompatible use or switch it to another incompatible use, then this topic starts to kick in and this guidance starts to kick in. So airport land use commissions, or ALUCs, they're established in every county with scheduled air service in California. Again, when we were formed in 2003, the Airport Authority was given this role. Formerly, Sandag had that role. And one of our duties under that role is to adopt formal airport land use compatibility plans for all 16 airports in the region. And those plans help us make determinations on which new land use plans and projects are appropriate around airports. And probably most people don't know that we even have 16 airports in the region, but we do. We have 12 public use airports, the bigger ones being McClellan Palomar, and of course, San Diego International. And then we have, and the rest being more general aviation airports. And then we have 4 military airports as well. So with that, I'll pass it to Ralph.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I'm Ralph Fredman. I'm a manager in our Planning and Environmental Affairs Department, and I assist with our airport land use compatibility planning efforts. ACPs are really made up of policies and standards that address 4 main components. The first being safety, which addresses the potential risk of aircraft accidents. These policies focus on limiting densities or intensities in certain uses, for instance, schools or hospitals, within specific zones where accidents have a higher percentage of occurring based on historical records. The second factor is noise, which addresses potential impacts to noise-sensitive land uses. And these policies really focusing on limiting certain uses, for instance, residents or schools that could be greatly impacted by aircraft noise, or they require new facilities to be sound attenuated to reduce that impact. And the third is airspace. This addresses potential hazards to flight. For instance, structures that are built too high that may impact the airspace surrounding an airport. Now, since the ALEC has no jurisdiction over the airspace or how the airport operates, the ACP policies really just enforce Federal Aviation Administration requirements. The FAA already administers its own airspace review process in which all projects within a vicinity to an airport or a navigational aid are required to be submitted to them for review. And typically what happens is if they were to make a determination that the structure is a hazard, then that would be a conflict with the AECP. But what typically happens is that the FAA will deem it an obstruction and require some kind of mitigation, typically marker lighting. And again, we would fold that into our determination as well, that in order to be in compliance with the ACP, that structure be marked and lit. And the fourth factor is overflight, which really only addresses the requirements to provide new homeowners notice of possible overflights. Again, similar to airspace, there's really already a requirement to disclose the proximity of airports and real estate transactions. So these policies really just supplement those requirements. Next slide. Now, all four factors that I just outlined make up the geographic boundary of the AECP, also referred to as the Airport Influence Area, or AIA. Following is the depiction of the AIA that surrounds McClellan-Palomar Airport. And this indicates where certain AECP policies would apply. The largest boundaries are associated with airspace. Again, this is governed by the FAA, and overflight. And these areas, overflight is, the way that we outline this is the way the aircraft arrive and depart to the airport, but also we take into account where the noise complaints are coming from. So that's how that area is defined. Now, the noise compatibility zones are based on modeled noise contours, and this is reflective of an airport's aircraft fleet mix, the time of day of operations. It does account for if there's nighttime flights, there's a penalty associated with those in the noise model. So it does factor that in. And then again, how the aircraft arrive and depart from the runways. Now, depending on the type of airport and the level of operations, the safety zones generally are the smallest zones. And these again focus on areas close to the airport where accidents historically have mostly occurred. Next slide. Now, once an ACP is adopted by the ALEC, the local agencies must submit all proposed land use projects to the ALEC for review. In addition, local agencies have two options to consider. The first option is they can amend their land use plans and regulations to be consistent with the ACP. We refer to this as ACP implementation, and this has already been achieved by numerous local agencies in San Diego County for adopted ACPs. And the second option is the local agency can choose to overrule all or part of the ACP, subject to making findings that their current land use plans and regulations achieve the objectives of the ALEC statute. A 2/3 majority vote of the governing body would be required for approval of that overrule resolution, and the local agency would have to submit its findings to the ALEC and Caltrans. Now, after either implementing or overruling the ACP, local agencies will no longer be required to submit land use projects to the ALEC. Only new or proposed amendments to land use plans or zoning would require submittal in order for us to determine if the amendments are still in line with the applicable ACP. Next slide. So as noted, prior to implementing or overruling, the land use project should be submitted to the ALEC for review. This is referred to as the ALEC consistency review process, where we will review the project and make a determination if the project is consistent with the adopted ACP policies. Now, if the application is complete once submitted, we can generally turn this around and make a determination within a few weeks, just depending on the complexity of the project. Now, typically when projects fall outside of the safety and noise compatibility zones, we don't require submittal unless the 7460 that the FAA makes has determined that the structure is a hazard and obstruction that requires some kind of mitigation. I believe most jurisdictions that fall within the AIA and have not implemented an applicable ACP are already coordinating with us, as Brendan mentioned, in submitting applications as needed. So thank you very much. We feel like, again, I believe nearly all jurisdictions are doing that. So again, thank you. Now, if there are ever any questions as to whether a project needs to be submitted, please feel free to contact ALEC staff and we can assist with making that determination. And really the best way to do that is to send an email, and this will begin at the end of the presentation as well. It's the ALEC app at san.org. So that's ALUC app at san.org. That email gets distributed to all ALEC staff, so we should be able to get a response back fairly quickly. Now, to assist local agencies and developers review projects to determine how they may be impacted by an ACP, we've developed an online GIS tool. The user can enter an APN or an address and pull up the ACP compatibility zones that would apply to that specific parcel. It's a great way to determine what a noise contour or a safety zone a proposed project may fall under. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. There is a link to the tool right there in the slide. I think I heard that this will be distributed out after the presentation. So again, that is a link to the tool that anyone can jump on there. It's in the public domain, so anyone can jump on there and look up certain parcels. Now, moving forward, we're working on expanding the capabilities of this tool. One feature that we are currently focused on is providing the user the ability to screen projects for potential airspace conflicts. I would say this is the most common question we get is how high can I build a structure? Now, while we will continue to rely on the FAA to make the ultimate determination, we do want to provide the users the ability to at least screen their project and determine if there may be potential conflicts. And just beyond the structure, you know, if the project were to include a crane, construction crane, we'd also ask that be reviewed as well, because that can have airspace implications. Although temporary, it could impact how the airport operates. So once that tool has been updated with that new capability, we will send out a notice to all local agencies on the upgrade. Next slide. I think that ends. So again, any questions you may have relative to the consistency determination process, the GIS tool, or how proposed projects may be impacted, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, the best way is that email alacapp@san.org, or you can contact us at 619-400-2464. That's my number, but please feel free to use it, and we can make sure we get a response back as soon as possible.
And then I'll just maybe close by sort of mentioning that, again, please use this as a tool. Caltrans Division of Aeronautics are also a great tool or a resource. We reach out to them all the time. This is sort of a niche area of planning. And, you know, from the airport authority's perspective, obviously ultimate land use authority rests with the jurisdiction. And that's exactly the way it should be. I think the intent of the State Aeronautics Act is really to make sure that through the ALUC processes, jurisdictions are giving you know, real consideration to these compatibility factors around airports. Again, at the end of the day, to protect your community members. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you both for that very informative presentation. Hopefully SANDAG and TWIG members can make use of those technical resources that are available. And as I peruse the list, I'm not seeing any hands go up. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. And we'll move to agenda item number 5, which, again, thank you, which has Sam Sanford from SANDAG here to update us on the 2021 Performance Management Rule 1 Safety Target Setting. Sam, kick it to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here today. I'm trying to adjust the device here just so you don't get a dizzying fan in the background. So yeah, today I am here to present on the 2021 Performance Management Target Setting Process. So this is actually the 4th time setting targets. These are safety targets for on-road incidents. Before I actually get into the details of this measure and the data before us today, I really want to take a minute to preface this with really critical importance of safety, safety planning, safety programming, always with the ultimate goal of driving down crashes and the severity of crashes. This particular item is really focused on a requirement by Federal Highway Administration to set annual targets for specific key performance measures. But I want to emphasize, you know, there's ongoing parallel work related to identifying projects that will deliver on that ultimate goal of reducing crashes and severity. So 2 quick examples of that SANDAG is working with Caltrans on is the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. The SHSP is the acronym for that one. That's a 4-year planning document and identifies and helps address safety challenge areas. There's also the Highway Safety Improvement Program Implementation Plan. And that one is actually a one-year plan that's going to look at how to best program limited HSIP dollars as we go through and get those dollars programmed. Sorry, kindergarten challenge real quick. So as I mentioned, this is the 4th round. They're setting these targets and they're set for the calendar year. For the past 3 rounds, SANDAG has elected to support statewide targets. And there's 2 options really. It's either support statewide targets or develop our own regional targets. Right now, those last 3 rounds have been supporting the statewide. The next slide will actually cover what the 5 required measures are. And actually, I forgot to see on my screen if you guys can see the slides.
I'm not seeing them, Sam. If you
Sam
want,
Solis or production, my apologies. Could you bring up that presentation?
I'll bring it up, Sam. This is Seth.
Thank you. I'm guessing there's a way to do everything by phone these days, but as far as trying to do a presentation and share slides, I'm limited. There we go. Thank you.
All right, I'm trying to, sorry, Sam, I'm trying to make sure.
You're fine.
Is it showing just the slides?
I see still the edit view. There we go. And then if you advance one, this is the first critical slide where you guys actually want to see what the content of the slide is. Prior to that, it was just me talking about the cover slide. So the 5 measures are on this screen right now. We have the number and rate of fatalities. And by rate, we're looking at 100 million vehicle miles traveled. So that brings in the exposure. It's based on how much people are out there traveling on the roadways. Second, the 3rd and 4th measure are the serious injury number and the rate of serious injuries, again by 100 million VMT. And then the last one is the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries combined. So this brings in cyclists and pedestrians together onto one measure. Next slide, please. So the process for setting targets really starts with Caltrans. They set theirs back in August. So they set theirs for August 31st, 2020. And based on this current setup, Caltrans is looking at a trend-based approach. So Federal Highway Administration gives a lot of leniency for state DOTs to determine how they want to set their safety targets. For the 2021 targets, Caltrans is looking at a trend base. They look at the most recently available data. They looked at the change over essentially 2017 and 2018, and they took that trend and also changed as far as what projects they plan to be open to traffic, economic considerations, how much people will be traveling. Of course, COVID was brought into that as well to set those 2021 targets. SANDAG is then required to set targets by the end of February. And our options again are to support the statewide targets or to set region-specific MPO targets. Can you advance one more slide, please? So if SANDAG continues to support the statewide targets, then we do not need to set a regional numeric target. We just provide Caltrans resolution saying that we continue to support the statewide ones. And then the tie-in with regional planning and regional programming is within the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, our 5-year revenue constrained, essentially CIP. There is a section in there that actually documents what projects are supporting those statewide targets. So as projects come in from local agencies into the RTIP, we also ask information about, is this a safety project? How much of the total project cost is related to delivering safety on public roads? Similarly, in the regional plan, there's a section that looks at what the targets are and our progress to targets over the course of the last 4 years, since regional plan generally comes out every 4 years. The next slide actually covers the actual targets from Caltrans. So in the far left column, you have the performance measures themselves. That center column has the numeric targets as they're required to be calculated by Federal Highway Administration. The data sets come from SWITRs and FARs, so the statewide integrated traffic safety system, and then also the federal fatality analysis reporting system for FARs. The furthest right column is the trend that Caltrans saw as far as that reduction between the most recently available observed data, and then also the other attributes they brought in when considering setting a target. So for fatalities, they're anticipating a 2.9% reduction. And for serious injuries, they're anticipating a 1.3% reduction. And then those two values are combined for the non-motorized performance measure at the fifth one on the list. The next 5 slides run us through observed data and also the targets, really the past, say, 9 years, let's say. So currently we have data up to 2018. 2019 and 2020 data is not yet finalized. There is a lag when it comes to safety. There's a high desire to make sure that the data is very accurate. There's also tracking of cases to make sure that the severity is correct as far as after an accident. So there's a significant lag of approximately 2 years between when an incident occurs and when it's considered final for these purposes. On these charts, everything in blue is statewide values. So you have the blue bars and the blue line. Everything in orange is regional values. The bars themselves, the vertical bars, are annual numbers. And then the lines are 5-year rolling average. Kind of the 5-year rolling average helps us get rid of some of the peaks and valleys that you have for annual changes. The green dots towards the right, I guess they're diamond shaped, are past targets that were established by Caltrans and supported by SANDAG. And then there's the furthest right green square is the 2021 target from Caltrans. So looking at these numbers for fatalities, we can see that statewide, there was a significant peak back in 2016, 2017. It appears that that has gone down in 2018. We hope that that was the peak, and now it's starting to come back down again. Still waiting on 2019 values. You can see for San Diego region, again in orange, it's relatively stable. All right, we don't have those same rises and falls as we have seen statewide. And you can also see that with the 5-year rolling average being a fairly flat line. Next slide, please. When we take those same fatality numbers and we essentially normalize it by exposure or these vehicle miles traveled number, now we can do a little better comparison to see how statewide is doing relative to the region and vice versa. So statewide again is in blue, San Diego region is in orange, and based on the amount of driving people are doing, the San Diego region is doing well relative to the statewide numbers. And again, you can see the targets off to the far right-hand side, and you can still see that peak for statewide fatalities and fatality rate in 2016, 2017, whereas for the San Diego region, it has stayed relatively flat. Next slide, please. On serious injuries, we can see a troubling trend of increasing serious injuries statewide. You can see that 2018, the annual value in blue exceeded the target that Caltrans had originally set. And for the San Diego region, the orange values are relatively constant at the bottom of the chart. Next slide, please. When we bring in vehicle miles traveled for that normalization, we can see how the San Diego region is doing again, doing better relative to the statewide values. There is, on the statewide side, that positive trend or increasing trend. On the San Diego region, it's potentially increasing. It's a little tough to tell until we get some more recent years in 2019, 2020 to see if that trend is going in an increasing direction or not. And then one more slide. This will be the last of the data review. So this is the non-motorized, the bicyclist and pedestrian fatality and serious injuries. So here again, we can see that the numbers statewide are increasing over the last almost this full time period of 9 years. And then for the San Diego region, it's staying relatively flat. So based on how the San Diego region is doing relative to the state, where it is performing better by rate, that's why staff continues to recommend that SANDAG support the statewide targets as opposed to developing its own specific regional targets. And you may have noticed with some of these charts that the 2018 target was covered or hit by the 2018 values. So if we advance one slide, I mentioned before that there's a significant delay with safety data. And so just now in 2020, are we able to see 2018 values? And that was the first year that the state set targets. That now has started a new process with Federal Highways Administration. Now that we have that data, they have started this review for all the states to see how they are doing, if they're making significant progress on the targets they set back really in 2017. In order to make significant progress, they need to be at or better than their target or better than the baseline the year prior for at least 4 of the 5 measures. So for 2018, California as a state did not make that significant progress. They were in fatality rate, serious injury rate, and number of serious injuries were the 3 measures that didn't show that significant progress. As a result, Caltrans needs to develop an implementation plan for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, essentially how best to spend those limited HSIP dollars. And so Caltrans has taken that on and is working on that as well as we speak. Next slide, please. So as far as next steps, we're kind of winding down our outreach to the working groups at SANDAG. Next, we'll be going out to policy advisory committees with these data and to get their input. We'll be going to the SANDAG Board of Directors in December and asking for them to adopt safety targets, ultimately providing either a resolution or regional targets to Caltrans by February 28th. I should say 2021. And then as far as integration with the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, we have a new RTIP coming out in 2021, and that section will be updated and again highlight safety projects that are supporting the safety targets. And then in the regional plan itself, we'll also have a updated section showing progress to targets and how we've supported those targets over the last several years. So that ends the presentation. I'm happy to take any comments or questions that Twig may have. Thank you.
Karen, you're muted.
Thanks, Seth. I did hit the button and apparently didn't stick. So again, just want to say thank you, Sam, for providing that update to us and that detailed presentation. This agenda item is up for discussion. And Seth, I just want to see if there are any public comments at this point.
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, so with that, let's see if we've got any Twig members, and it does look like Russ Cunningham from City of Oceanside has his hand raised. So Russ, go ahead with your comment.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for that presentation. Can you speak at all to the factors that contributed to the uptick in incidences in 2016 and 2017? Is there some forensic work that's been done on that to understand what factors might be responsible for that?
Yeah, I would say a great spot is the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And although it does say highway safety on there, it does cover safety data for all public roads. So it's kudos to Caltrans for doing that kind of documentation. And they actually break it down county by county, and they look at at crash reports and seeing what types of crashes were increasing or changing over a time period and over a 10-year time period, and then also what contributing factors there were. So for contributing factors, they're looking for things like excessive speed, distracted driving, if there's anything age-related, like the outlying number of younger drivers or older drivers being involved in those types of crashes. So that would be the best spot to start for statewide numbers. I can say for our region, Excessive speed is a big one. Obviously, as you get down to the details, it's going to vary significantly. So in the urban area, we're going to get a lot more crashes that are due to interrupted flow traffic. We have stop signs and stoplights. So we get a lot of rear end crashes and intersection related crashes. But then as you get into the rural areas, you're going to get more lane departure kind of crashes. So to answer that, you want to define the area well, and that's something that we continue to kind of look into to better understand what's driving those numbers up. But as far as the statewide itself or in totality, I can't speak to those ones, but I can get back to you on that.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay, so I've got Alyssa Muto.
Hi, Sam, thank you so much for all the information. I wanted to ask a question. You mentioned that San Diego is ahead of the rest of the state on the average, and that for that reason we tend to adopt the state's metrics. Does that impact the amount of money that is distributed across statewide for, like, say, Cal OTS grants? Do they use counties that are performing worse on the basis to allocate money to regions? Or, and so therefore, would we want to change our metrics so that we are setting ourselves with further goals that maybe don't look as good in the near term, but long term get us farther, and maybe get more funding coming to San Diego through, like, Cal OTS grants?
That is a very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. I have not seen any of the grant application details that are weighing this particular set of performance measures from federal highways, but it's something we definitely want to track. And if you've seen something, I'd love to talk with you offline to figure that out better. So far, we've been kind of watching the SB1 grants to see if they bring anything in. I have not seen anything on that front. To our knowledge, there's no funding implication with this.
Okay, I was just curious. That was going to be my next question. Is there any funding allocation correlation with these metrics?
Yeah, none yet. HSIP is the principal fund for safety projects. There's other areas as well, ATP as well. HSIP being competitive, that's going to be more on a Caltrans question. I have not seen that they've adjusted their application to say that they're going to favor areas that are struggling in the federal performance measures. Part of it is that these measures were really written at a national level to better understand how states are doing and large urbanized areas. So they're great at that macro level, but when you want to understand and have more details about what best to program and plan in a smaller area, you got to dive into the details. These measures aren't super helpful in that respect.
And Karen, maybe I have one follow-up thing to share or to say is maybe we can come back to this at a later date, just with the president-elect identifying transportation and multimodal transportation for lower emissions, and I would assume going hand in hand with safety and national Vision Zero goals, that this might be something we just want to kind of keep our eye on to make sure that we aren't losing out on potential federal funding that might come with that initiative.
Understand that, Alyssa, and I think that's a great point. So that helps out with agenda item number 8 as far as future meeting topics, but definitely hope that Seth can help facilitate that at the appropriate timeframes. Would certainly support that. Okay. I am not seeing any other hands raised at this point in time, so thank you once again, Sam, for the information. We are going to move on to agenda item number 7, because we've already covered 6 early on, and that's the member communication. So this is really the opportunity that we have to share with the group anything of interest, or that's a great feature of something that's going on in our jurisdictions. And hopefully we'll have somebody weigh in. Just raise your hand if that's the case. I've got Alyssa Muto.
Well, I'm going to share our recent successes here in the city of San Diego from the planning department. On Monday, we had pretty much a planning dedicated city council hearing, and the city adopted our housing solutions, which is an opt-in incentive-based program for housing development. You can find out more about that on the planning department website at Complete Communities. And the other initiative was our Complete Communities Mobility Choices, and that's the implementation of SB 743 and a new VMT threshold with an accompanying ordinance that provides for an in lieu fee. And that in lieu fee is going to be used in our more VMT efficient areas to create better bike, pedestrian, and transit supportive amenities. So we're really excited about that. We had a little bit of a hurdle with parks, but we'll be bringing that hopefully forward under our new administration. And then on Tuesday, we had another community plan update adopted with the Kearney Mesa Community Plan. So we're really excited about some of those big initiatives that we have going at the city.
It's wonderful to hear, Alyssa. I appreciate hearing what's going on in the city of San Diego and some of those exciting milestones. Let's see, it doesn't look like I have any other hands raised. And so that would lead us to agenda item number 8, which are our future meeting topics. Now, we already heard Alyssa make a request for us to have some additional feedback. So are there any other suggestions at this particular point in time? Not seeing any hands raised. Let's see, Sandag staff, do you have anything to offer on this subject?
Karen, we do have a hand raised from the public, if from Keen Simmons, who I believe is with the San Diego LAFCO. If we want to hear what Keen has to suggest.
Sure.
Go ahead, Keen. I've unmuted you. I think you need to unmute yourself, though.
Yeah, thank you so much, Seth. So very quickly, this was my first TWIG meeting, very informative. I enjoyed it. Typically, our chief policy analyst, Robert Berry, stands in. But in terms of just potential items, I would be curious if there was interest among the group for LAFCO staff to perhaps provide an update and a presentation on a planning activity that certainly affects all the cities. And that is, as we dive into our sphere of influence updates for the next 5-year cycle. And again, it would be a friendly primer, things that are on our mind, but it would also be an opportunity to calibrate for those on the TWIG committee, things that inevitably will start coming towards you in your respective roles with your cities and the county for that matter going forward. So if there is interest, I certainly would like us to perhaps come back and do something. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Keen. I would like to offer the opportunity for the TWIG members, if you want to raise your hands, if you would like to provide any feedback to Keen on that suggestion. That would be good for them to be able to hear, as well as Sandag staff. I am not seeing any hands.
Karen, this is Colleen at Clemenson, and I think it would be a great idea if Keen could bring forward that information. We do have a Sandag staff member that's been serving on one of the advisory committees for some of the other planning efforts that are underway there, and I think it's great for us to connect with you. So we'd be happy, Seth and I would be happy to work with you to get something scheduled if the chair concurs with that.
I do concur, and I think it would be an excellent opportunity just to, again, to have some engagement with LAFCO as we continue to move forward with all of our respective efforts as it relates to any of the input that we have to provide for the sphere of influence updates. I did see a hand go up earlier from
I think it was Sandy Hazelwood, but she's put her hand down.
Put her hand down at this point. All right. So
I just wanted to concur with Colleen.
Perfect. Okay. It sounds like we're all on the same page in that respect. I'm not seeing any other hands go up. So I think we've got that pretty much addressed. And will be on a future docket at some particular date. So with that, the hour of, well, I'm not quite ready for adjournment, but the hour of 2:47, according to my clock, has come. Our next meeting will be on December 10th, 2020. We are still coordinating with, I'm still coordinating with SANDAG staff as far as the potential agenda items. But for now, that's our standing meeting time. And with that, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for participating in today's meeting, and look forward to our next session. So with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.